He is a great thinker, a great author, by the way, the author of last year's bestseller called The American Miracle. Please welcome Mr. Michael Manafort.
One of the most recognizable thinkers and pundits. You see him all over cable news, does many engaging speaking engagements all throughout the country. He's a former sheriff of Milwaukee County.
All right, up next is a very special guest, a guy actually personally who I learned a lot from when I was much younger, working for the ABC network in New York. This man was the big morning host of the radio station back in New York. And it was my first job as a talk show host, and I did the all-night show, the graveyard shift. And this fellow used to say to me, "Hey, Brian, it's only 5 o'clock in the morning. Why don't you stick around for an hour and help me out on the air?" And I learned so much just by watching him do radio, because he's probably the finest at it. And I learned so much about what was going on in the world, and his perspectives have always been so intriguing. So it's my pleasure, really, to welcome the late host here on AM 870, and he will be have a little treat for us in a moment. Please welcome an AM 870 institution, Mr. Mike Gallagher. Please assist others before you assist yourself.
Yes.
No, assist yourself.
Not only a flight attendant, but the Vanna White of today's program. All right, finally, he was born in South Central Los Angeles. On AM 870, and of course all across the country. He is on the air with us from 6 p.m. until 9 p.m. We call him the Sage from South Central.
All right, there they are, all geared up and ready to go for Townhall 2018. Before we get started, we have a treat for you, and we've done this in other years, and it goes over so well because Mr. Mike Gallagher is so talented. We ask that you stand with hand on heart. Mike is going to sing for us our national anthem. We have a flag right here to highlight.
And I certainly hope everyone will join. Oh, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose bright stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we marched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
That that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Mike. All right, who's ready for the rules? There aren't many, but we do have a few. The way this is going to work is that Brian and I are going to ask questions to each of the panelists. And after each question, we will ask the question to the initial panelist and then to the secondary. Well, nobody's secondary here on this panel, but we'll ask it to a second person. When the panelist is called first, he will answer the question with a 2-minute time limit. When with a 1-minute follow-up to that question. Now, we are going to add a little spice to this year's panel. How many of you are still watching football? A couple of you, right? We know about throwing a flag on the play, right? So each of our panelists will have a white flag that they can raise their hand and throw one time during this panel. And if they want to chime in on something, they'll be given 2 additional minutes to do that. Sound good? All right.
All right. Okay, here we go. Want to start with your response. Your response here at Townhall 2018. We do this on the morning answer sometimes. Jennifer and I will give letter grades. We'll give letter grades to the mayor, to the governor, to various candidates, and of course to the president on various issues. So from the day President Donald Trump was sworn in as our 45th president, that's very nice of you. You're very nice. You're very nice people. I mean, that's very nice. I love to get ovations like that. You really are great, 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 great clappers. I've met some clappers, and you're like the greatest clapper. Okay, so by applauding or what have you, from the day he took office to today, this Sunday, a letter grade. I'll give the grade, and then you applaud if you think that's his grade. His overall performance, I'll point out, includes policy, agenda, executive orders, Supreme Court appointments. It includes tweeting. It includes everything, okay? All right, so here we go. We're going to start low and go high, because when they go low, we go high. All right, here we go. How many here, by a show of applause, would actually give President Trump's job performance if you were a professor at Cal State Northridge? How many would give him an F? I knew I loved you the moment I. All right.
That is a professor.
Oh, that is
a professor. My alma mater, by the way. Thank you.
How many would think a D grade would be appropriate? How many would give President Trump's overall job performance grade the letter C? How many will applaud and say they'd give him the grade of B? And finally, how many Town Hall 2018 participants here would give President Trump, thus far, an A grade?
I think the A's have it. I'm sorry.
The A's do seem to have it. It seems to have. I'm not the brightest guy, but I think the A's got it.
All right, well, let's jump into a question. This one, we will start with Sheriff David Clark. The follow-up will be Mike Gallagher. And this question is about the hurricane. Hurricane Florence hit the Carolinas and Virginia, a lot of flooding, a lot of issues for people to deal with. But much of the media's attention has gone to some comments made by President Trump on Twitter this past week about the death toll in Puerto Rico. Do you think, Sheriff and Mike, that he was right to call out this death toll, what he thinks is a discrepancy? Do you think he's right? Do you think he was wrong? Or was this a presidential misfire?
Uh-oh. When this guy doesn't have a microphone, we got to get him a microphone.
Somebody will get arrested.
He's a sheriff.
There we go.
Yeah.
You're messing with the wrong guy.
Yeah. My hand, it's not me. I swear it's not me.
Yes, it is.
Let's hand that man a microphone.
There we
There
go.
it is. It's on now, Sheriff.
Mhm.
Is it working now?
I'd offer to translate, but it might come out differently.
Anyway,
No, we can't do that.
is that working now? It's working now? All right.
Is yours working?
Yes, it's working
Good,
now.
okay.
All right.
We found one.
Of course, he's right to call it out. The reason is because this media has done nothing but obstruct, lie, cheat, steal about this president from the time he was elected through the inauguration. All it was, the numbers, okay, they're based on a model, right? When he left, my understanding, when he left Puerto Rico, no one was talking about numbers that high. It might be, I don't know, but the thing is, it's based on a model that is 3,000, whatever. We don't do death tolls by models. We do death tolls by body counts, actual body counts. So I would say, show me the bodies, where they buried, so on and so forth. But sometimes we get, and I'm not talking about the president. The president can do whatever he wants. We get mired down in stuff that doesn't matter. They're talking about Puerto Rico while the great people of North Carolina are dealing with, the catastrophe that they are from Hurricane Florence. And that's what should have been talked about by the media, reporting on the rescue efforts, that they got everything in place and ready to go, and some empathy for the people who had to leave and come back to nothing. Many of them will flood, so on and so forth. So to me, the body count in Puerto Rico, and I don't mean to sound insensitive, people lost their lives there, but this far down the road to be talking and arguing about that, I find kind of foolish, but that's what this media does.
The reason the vast majority of people in this theater enthusiastically give the president an A is because we know that if there was even a higher letter grade we could give him, we would, considering what's been thrown at him. Morning, noon, night. The hurricane, the tail of the hurricanes is a perfect example of what he has to go up against. He can't do anything right as far as they're concerned. There's a joke that I've heard a lot of my callers say: if he walked on water, they'd say that's because he's too stupid to know how to swim. And so the reason he's tweeting about Puerto Rico is, first of all, he knew what was going to happen with Florence, and it's already begun. We're already hearing from the Washington Post and MSNBC that, oh, look how great the response has been in the Carolinas. That's because those are white people and those are Trump supporters. That's how ugly and vile the Trump hatred and the Trump deranged syndrome has become. There's a lady who is described as a conservative blogger for the Washington Post, Jennifer Rubin, and said on TV this week that the president killed the people of Puerto Rico twice. He killed them, she said. So that's the garbage that he's up against. He's still continuing to perform. He's still continuing to delight millions and millions of us who support him and who voted for him and have been with him from day one. And that's why if there was a higher grade than A, we'd give him a higher grade than A.
All right. I'm going to ask a follow-up question that comes from a bit from the other side. I'm going to put it to Michael Medved and ask Dennis Prager to respond second, right after Michael, because we're talking about with the issue of Puerto Rico. The President of the United States is denying that 3,000 people lost their lives. That some, and you guys talk about morality a lot on your program, might view the denial of such a mass death as immoral. And it's also, the President of the United States needs to have his facts straight. If he really doesn't know how many American citizens died in that Puerto Rican hurricane, he ought to be there figuring out the answer to that question, Michael, don't you think?
I think his main responsibility is making sure that the preparations are good for Hurricane Florence in North Carolina. Look, this is one of those things where we are now less than 8 weeks away from a very, very crucial election. And it does no good to Republican candidates to be arguing about death tolls in Puerto Rico. The president sent out an idiotic tweet. And I think we can acknowledge that he's done many wonderful things for the country. And I sincerely understand and second some of the tremendous applause here. But can we acknowledge that he handed his opponents a tool, and opponents of all Republicans, by getting, we were about to win with Judge Kavanaugh, which is a great appointment and will be a great victory and have significance for the country. We are all enjoying the best economy that most people can remember. And, you know, James Carville, who's no friend of Republicans, says he doesn't understand why President Trump won't allow himself to get credit for this great economy. And in his rallies, he does better with this now. He goes out and he tells people, let's focus on the economy and the jobs and the raises and the lower taxes and the growth rate, which is far more than anybody expected. But instead, for the president to take his precious time at his bully pulpit and to start arguing about a death toll of a hurricane which was devastating to the island of Puerto Rico, whether it was 100 people or 3,000 people who died. It's below his dignity, and he should avoid it.
It's a very complex question. There are two questions here, at least. One is, what would be effective for the president, which is mostly what Michael is posing. But there is another one, and that is, do the media lie with the ease with which you breathe? And I have said this before. I never watched Donald Trump on television. I'm one of the 11 Americans who was cited who did not see Donald Trump on TV prior to his announcing for his candidacy. I opposed his candidacy, although I said from the very beginning, and it's in print in National Review, that I would support him if he got the nomination. He has turned out to be a great president. Not a good president, a great president. And so with regard to the numbers in Puerto Rico, I believe they're lying, and there's a very simple way to determine who's lying. Give us the names of the 3,000 people who died as a result. If you do that, then the president was wrong. If you can't do it, the New York Times and the LA Times and NPR and CBS and ABC and NBC are liars. Just as they lied, I'll give you one example. I could spend all 2 hours telling you how much they lie. I was on CNN on Don Lemon. I've been on a lot of times. And to his credit, not to mine, to his. And he had me on, I guess it was about a year ago, and I announced that, Don, your network and many others announced that the president increased anti-Semitism in the United States. Well, as a Jew, as an author of a book on anti-Semitism, as a fighter against anti-Semitism, and a former professor of Jewish studies at Brooklyn College, I knew it was a lie, that he did not increase anti-Semitism one iota, but the New York Times headlined that his election brought anti-Semites into increased prestige in America, the example being all of the bomb threats to Jewish community centers. Then it came out that 90% of those bomb threats were sent in by an American Jewish kid living in Israel who was deranged. The other 10% were sent in by a black radical who wanted to frame his ex-girlfriend. Who lies more, the president or the press? We can find out in Puerto Rico. Give us the names of all 3,000 who died as a result of the hurricane.
A white flag from Mr. Gallagher already.
I just want to add 30 seconds. I'm friends with Tom Von Essen, who was the fire department commissioner during 9/11. And he is now heading up the FEMA efforts in Puerto Rico, New Jersey, and New York. I had him on my show the other day, and he pointed out that the government, those who run the government inside the confines of Puerto Rico, are corrupt. They are corrupt and they are incompetent. He used those words, and Tom Von Essen is a fine man. He got us through. You remember him standing next to Rudy Giuliani's side as the fire commissioner. He lost 300, almost 400 firefighters. The government of Puerto Rico is corrupt. They're incompetent, and the president is right to point that out, because the president knew now we're going to get hammered in the Carolinas. And the same, Dennis is right. You got a 3,000 death count that came out of nowhere, and this activist journalists don't look and see the formula. How do we get there? Who are those names? How did that happen? Very peculiar. They didn't go down and chase that. And he was right to tell the American people about that.
Thank you.
All right, the next question is about Judge Brett Kavanaugh. It'll be for Larry Elder first, and Michael Medved, you will be the second person to answer that. I would love if you would also include an answer to a question as part of it. During your last response, you said that because of this tweet about Puerto Rico, that perhaps Judge Brett Kavanaugh's nomination, his confirmation, could be in jeopardy. So if you could speak to that too as part of your answer, I'd be interested to know if you think it's been blown by the president. So, next question is, Judge Brett Kavanaugh sat through I think we could call it a chaotic confirmation hearing just a few weeks ago. Last week, Senator Dianne Feinstein sent over a letter to the FBI with allegations about the judge. There was a hiss. The question is, Larry and Michael, are Senate Democrats effectively casting doubt over Judge Kavanaugh, or will he ultimately be confirmed? And do you think any Democrats will be supportive of Judge Brett Kavanaugh during his confirmation proceedings? Larry?
Well, I think that he certainly will be confirmed. This is not just a Hail Mary. It's a hellish Mary, is what she's done. Allegedly, Brett Kavanaugh, when he was 17 years old, held some girl in a dorm room against her will, and one of his best friends was witnessing it. The best friend already says he has no recollection of it. The woman, however, has now identified herself. It turns out she's a lawyer, given her name, and said that if I'm going to jeopardize his nomination, I should have enough courage to come forward and say who I am. So at least she's done that. And apparently the FBI is looking at it. But the FBI has also examined him ever since he's been on the appellate court. They also examined him when he was working in the White House. And now all of a sudden this allegation comes forward. It reminds me of what happened during the 2012 election when Mitt Romney, allegedly, when he was at some boarding school, held down some kid who they suspected of being gay, who had dyed his hair, and his hair was long, and supposedly Romney led a band of boisterous boys who held this guy down and cut his hair. The boy later on died of AIDS. The family said the boy never ever said that this ever happened. If it happened, they said we certainly would know about it. Romney had no recollection of it. The other boys could not be found to corroborate the story. Paul Begala, who is a pundit on CNN, talked about this, wrote a column and said, the headline was, "Once a bully, always a bully." So something that Romney didn't recall that took place 40 years ago. The boy never told his family, once a bully, always a bully. This is how these people roll. And that's why you're seeing Trump pounded already on Hurricane Florence. It's not just that they want to use the Florence hurricane to show that he's incompetent, not just to show that he's a global warming denier, but also to show that he's racist. Remember during Hurricane Katrina, Barney Frank said during hearings, George W. Bush responded sluggishly to Katrina because he wanted to engage in, and I'm quoting, ethnic cleansing by inaction, end of quote. Spike Lee speculated that George W. Bush had the levees blown up on purpose to flood the New Orleans district to rid it of blacks so that Louisiana would forever become a red state. I'm not making this up. And you have Jeffrey Toobin just the other day on CNN saying that if 3,000 whites had died during Hurricane Irma and Maria, Trump would not have called it a success. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, Trump is a racist. This is how these guys are rolling. So Brett Kavanaugh is sexist. Brett Kavanaugh is a pervert. Donald Trump is a homophobe. Donald Trump is a Nazi. Donald Trump is a racist. That's how these guys roll because they have no agenda. Obama gave us the worst economic recovery since 1949. Hillary ran with no criticism whatsoever of his policies. So what makes you think this economy would be doing this well if Hillary had won? It's absurd.
Yeah, I certainly agree with the last point that Larry made, and that's the point we should be talking about. Honest to goodness, think about it for a moment. The idea that we're talking about something that happened allegedly in 1983, right? In 1983, in a party, I know it's really shocking, and if there are tender people here, please cover your ears. There were some high school kids, they were 17, they were drinking. Now, you know, this has never, ever, ever happened again. And I'm sure.
I haven't seen this since George W. Bush's daughters were doing this type of thing.
That's right. No, the entire thing is madness. I mean, one of the things, first of all, I don't believe it for a moment. Everything that we know about Brett Kavanaugh is a person of honor, of compassion, a model, husband and a model father and a model member of the community who coaches Catholic League basketball, and by the way, has never had a whisper against him of molesting anybody or insulting anybody or doing anything wrong. And what's so loathsome about this is to even engage in the conversation. And look, I think that at one point, it's something that has meant a great deal to me. There is an old proverb that was cited repeatedly by Winston Churchill, which is the dogs bark, but the caravan moves on. It doesn't really help to bark back. I think Judge Kavanaugh has handled this in an admirable way. They should proceed to a vote. And even if no Democrat votes for him, and that was part of your question, I think he will win confirmation by the exact same vote that Clarence Thomas did, which is 52-48, which means that there will be at least one Democrat, and I think it will probably be Claire McCaskill who votes in his direction.
I want to take 30 seconds on this.
Sure.
Jump in here. This was nothing more than a political hit job that has become standard operating procedure for the Democrats on Capitol Hill whenever a Republican president gets to nominate somebody to the Supreme Court. It's almost like a rite of passage. Basically, they're saying, hey, we know we can't stop you, but we're going to smear you. I mean, how do you unring that bell? There's certain things in this country that for a political figure are very hard to overcome. One would be domestic violence, if you're accused of that. Child molestation, right? Sexual assault. And if it didn't happen, how do you disprove it? He will live with this, and every time, once he's confirmed, he will be confirmed. You know what the news stories will start out with? Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who was accused of blah, 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 wrote the opinion for this case here. He's going to carry that for the rest of his life. This is disgusting how this process smears people like this. It's become part of politics, but like I said, it's standard operating procedure for the Democrats.
Okay. Our next question will go to Mike Gallagher first, and then to Sheriff Clark after for a response. Sheriff, particularly because I know you know a thing or two because you were on the Morning Answer and we talked about this issue. We all know that the networks, they're rebooting, like ABC brought back the Roseanne show, right? Roseanne came back, and they're bringing Alf back. One of the networks is now reportedly bringing back Flipper. It stars Paul Manafort, and it's it debuts in the fall. So I don't know exactly when. The week ended, gentlemen, with Paul Manafort taking a deal from Bob Mueller. And the question becomes, why would he take the deal after being convicted in the first trial on 8 counts, on the eve of his second trial? And of course, is the speculation here that he's gonna sing about President Trump to Bob Mueller. Do the Democrats see this as the win that they've been hoping for, Mike Gallagher?
You used the word speculation as that he might sing. I think the better phrase is wishful thinking. The wishful thinking, the hopeful belief is that he'll turn against President Trump. You know, there's a great commentator named Molly Hemingway who I really appreciate, and I like her work a lot. And she's often on Brett Baer's panel, and she's often on with mainstream media types, and she's the one who keeps repeating over and over like a broken record, but it's crucial, it's really important, that nothing that Manafort has been convicted of, nothing that any of the indictments, any of the convictions, anything has had anything to do with President Trump or the campaign or collusion with Russia. Nothing. To the great Dennis Prager's point about how the media lies. The inference is that, oh, this is all Russia related. This is all it has nothing. What's happened is the special counsel, as feared, is casting a wide net and catching people up in banking improprieties and bank fraud and all of that. We all know that, but the American people don't typically hear that because the media isn't advancing that. All they're saying is, all the president's men, all the president's men. You know, the media's distortion of this has been profound. And, you know, I want to go back, if I can, take just a footnote to the Kavanaugh mess. And it is a mess. Sheriff Clark is right. This is This is devastating for Judge Kavanaugh. With the lady identifying herself and coming forward, now it goes from an unsubstantiated and anonymous smear to what people will call a credible allegation. And they're going to try to put the brakes on this, and you get ready for a bloodbath. As we are days away from the midterm election, I do believe it serves a great reminder that this is how the left plays ball. This is how they play, as Larry said, this is how they roll. It's what they do. Dianne Feinstein sat on that letter. They didn't bring this up during the hearings. She knew about it all through the hearings, all through the meetings, all through the testimony, never mentioned it. You know why? Because this is where an 11th hour play like this might be effective. Voters have to remember on November 6th, this is how they play ball, and we can't play ball this way. We've got to keep the House, we've got to keep the Senate, we've got to keep the president's agenda going.
All right. Sheriff Clark?
Well, I'm see if I can do this under 2 minutes because I think it's a waste of time to talk. And I don't mean from the question standpoint. I'm talking about.
It's okay, it was Brian's question.
Talking about Paul Manafort.
It's Brian's fault.
It's all making sense now,
Talking
Sheriff,
about
isn't it?
Paul Manafort. All right. What Paul Manafort was accused of doing, I could care less whether he's actually guilty or not. He was convicted in the first trial. He's going to plead in the second. Happened well before any Russia collusion allegation. Okay. He's just a fall guy in this whole thing, as you all know, all right? It's a distraction, once again, to keep us away from what we should be talking about. The fact is, after 2 years, they have not found one iota of Russian collusion. And that's what this Mueller investigation, that's what Mueller was impaneled to do, and they haven't found it. And you know what? Got a surprise for you. They're not going to find it because it didn't happen, all right? So my understanding, and of course, the media loves this stuff, right? It keeps this whole thing going. And now it's on, before it was Michael Cohen, right? And he was supposed to have some dirt on President Trump, and that turned out not to be the case either. But according to his lawyer, Manafort's, he pled because, look, the guy's 70 years old. He's facing this conviction, 80 years in prison. 80 years. If the federal government comes after you, they're going to get you. They got a 97% conviction rate in federal trials, not because they win, because people plead, because they run out of money. And they can't defend it after a certain point in time. Okay? So Manafort sees the handwriting on the wall, and he said he wanted to make sure his family was taken care of. And he's pleading to a maximum, if you believe what's in the media, and you can't these days, of 10 years. So he'll do 10 years, he'll get out at 80, he still might see the outside world after that. He's probably smart to plead to that. Okay, they had him dead to rights, but it has nothing to do with Russia collusion.
Thank you. The next question is for Dennis Prager with a follow-up by Larry Elder. We hear a lot about the deep state, right? We hear a lot about Lisa Page, Peter Strzok, Bruce Orr. We hear about the deep state all the time on talk radio and in conservative news media. So Dennis and Larry, is the deep state real? Does it exist? What are their ultimate objectives? And who are they?
Here is a rule of life that I have spoken of since I began speaking many years ago. Everything the left touches, it ruins. There is no exception. There is no exception. The left has ruined our universities, it's ruining our high schools, it's ruining our elementary schools, it is ruining boys and girls who are increasingly told they are not boys and girls, that later in life, don't laugh, it's the least funny thing happening in the United States. If you ask me the thing that most troubles me, it is the left's war on gender. It troubles me more than any other thing in America. Never in recorded history were children told they will decide later in life whether they're a boy or a girl. Never. There is no example of this. What does this have to do with the deep state? The left has poisoned the CIA and the FBI just as they have poisoned schools. Whatever, the left is a force of chaos. You must understand that. It is a nihilistic tsunami. Whatever it touches dies. Like the Boy Scouts are not even any longer the Boy Scouts. because they had to take girls into the Boy Scouts. Religion, look from the papacy in Rome to non-Orthodox Judaism to mainstream Protestantism. Look what the left has done to religion. Everything it touches, it ruins. Not liberals, leftists. There is a big difference between liberal and left, and you should ask every one of your relatives or friends, none in any way confrontationally, just, and it's an honest question, it's not a trick question. Do you think you are a liberal or a leftist? And they'll say, what do you mean? They won't know what you mean, and that's fair. So say, I'll give you a couple of examples. Do you believe that it is a good idea to have dormitories on campuses just for blacks? If you do, you're a leftist. If you don't, you're a liberal. Liberalism believed in racial integration. Leftism believes in racial segregation. They believe just what George Wallace believed. The left is a reincarnation of old Southern racism. That is where it resides today. Blacks are inferior, therefore we change rules for them. Blacks should live among themselves. Blacks should have their own graduation ceremonies. And this is called progressive. It is sick. So yes, they have poisoned the FBI. For the first time in my life, I do not know what it means to be a head of an FBI. Are you corrupt or honest? I grew up believing you were honest. Thanks to the left, I no longer know.
The question was, do I believe there is a deep state? If by deep state you mean there are people within the Trump administration, within branches of government at the very highest levels who are trying to undermine the agenda that the American people voted for in 2016, yes, I do. If Hillary can get away with referring to people that oppose her and her president, her husband, as the vast right-wing conspiracy, the deep state is every bit as legitimate a term as that. When you have somebody submitting an unsigned op-ed piece to the New York Times, Obama made 3 major decisions in his presidency, all of which, in my opinion, were built on lies, all of which could have warranted an unsigned op-ed piece from somebody within his administration. He pulled all the troops out of Iraq over the advice of his entire security team. Now, it's true that he ran calling the Iraq War a dumb war and promised to do that, and he did just that. But they all advised him not to do it. The Joint Chiefs advised him not to do it. Hillary advised him not to do it. The Secretary of Defense advised him not to do it. CIA Director advised not to do it. The National National Security Advisor advised not to do it. All the teams said no. He pulls them out. Ray Odierno, one of the Joint Chiefs who advised against it, said, had he not pulled the troops out, ISIS would not have come in and ISIS would not have metastasized. Obama quietly puts back about 5,000 troops. What does he do? He blames it on George W. Bush. He said, my hands were tied. I had to follow the timeline that he set forth. That's a lie. And he got away with it. The Iran deal, the guy that negotiated it bragged to the New York Times. And, we sold this based upon some sort of narrative between the hardliner Ayatollahs and the moderate Ayatollahs. Ha, 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 he says, there's no such thing as a moderate Ayatollahs. They're all hardliners. Where was the op-ed piece from somebody within the administration saying this is crazy? And the third one was Obamacare. Not only did he lie and say, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. That was called the lie of the year. He also said, more importantly, it's going to bend the cost curve down, save every family $2,500 a month. A year. And he also said that the reason we want to do this is because when my mother had cancer and she lay dying in a hospital bed in Hawaii, she had to fight with her insurance carrier to pay her hospital bills and her medical costs. That turned out to be a lie. Where was the op-ed piece from somebody within the administration saying, wait a second, the American people are about to semi-socialize 1/7 of the nation's economy based upon a bunch of lies. We got to do something about this. Do you think the New York Times would have published an op-ed piece had somebody submitted it during the Obama administration about any of those 3 issues? I think not. So yes, there is a deep state.
Okay, Larry, thank you. Our next question will go to Michael Medved and Sheriff David Clark, if you'll follow up. And the question is about specifically the New York Times op-ed piece that Larry referenced. In this op-ed piece, an anonymous writer published as an essay on the op-ed page of the New York Times, they describe President Trump as unfit to hold the office. They describe his senior officials and staffers around him as being concerned with his judgment, with his aptitude, quite frankly, with his temper. Even the Bob Woodward book does similar things. This question about the New York Times op-ed piece, Michael Medved. Who do you think authored it? And do you believe what some conservative friends of mine believe, that the New York Times just made it all up out of whole cloth and printed it just because they wanted to? Is that possible, Michael Medved?
It isn't. And the reason it isn't is because no one in the Trump administration or in the Trump orbit has said so. They are looking for someone who wrote it. And look, anyone, if anyone in the New York Times or involved with the New York Times, if anyone fabricated that thing, then it would have to be probably a dozen people at the newspaper who knew about it, and they would all have destroyed careers and deserve it. I think the piece was a disgrace, and I'll tell you why. At the very beginning of the Trump administration, one of the first indications for a lot of people who were very wary about the new president was that he might not be as destructive as feared. Was he appointed an outstanding cabinet, and he appointed some very good people around him. And everybody said so. This was a guy who, after all, had very little governmental experience, namely none. And he picked people like General Mattis and General McMaster. And he picked people like Gary Cohn, who's gone now, but replaced by the outstanding Larry Kudlow. And now we have General McMaster is replaced by another outstanding aide, John Bolton. And in any event, all of these fine people, including Stephen Mnuchin, the Secretary of Treasury, around President Trump, gave people reason to say, yeah, he has cooler heads. He has people who can help him. He has people who can help him navigate some of the challenges that every president faces. What is so awful about this particular piece is that believing for a moment that there are people around President Trump who try to rein in some of his worst inclinations, and there are some inclinations that are self-destructive. Given that fact, this completely undermines any effort like that. Because now all of a sudden the president is going to disregard any advice. It will only increase his paranoia. It harms the administration. The only thing I can think of, and again, I mentioned on the air, that it may be a low-level speechwriter in an office adjacent to the White House, in the vice president's office, who is doing this as a great act of self-aggrandizement. Because just as this scurrilous woman has come forward now to smear Brett Kavanaugh, so eventually this author anonymous, I think, will step forward and get a very, very big, juicy book contract and be considered by some people on the left that Dennis Prager decries as some kind of a hero. It's not heroic, it's villainous in every sense.
Okay, Sheriff Clark is the second person, then Larry, if you want to use your...
He's got the white flag.
But Sheriff Clark, please.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree a little bit with my panel colleague up here in terms of whether the New York Times, whether it would be beyond them to have fabricated this. Yes, they could have, and yes, I think they did, and here's why. First of all, it's a fool's errand.
Then why hasn't the president or anyone said so?
First of all, it's a fool's errand to try to figure out who did it. All right, we could talk about that for the next 2 years and might not be able to figure it out. But here's the thing, the New York Times has no credibility. When you lose credibility, if you're a cop and you lose credibility and then you go in to try to get a search warrant, the prosecutor and the judge are going to get out of here, you have no credibility. Yeah, but Your Honor, or whatever, I have a confidential source that, no, just get out of here because your credibility is destroyed. The New York Times has been lying about Donald Trump for the last 2 years. So I'm not going to let them get away with, first of all, I write op-eds. There is no way any of the blogs that I write for would let me submit an op-ed under anonymous. They wouldn't do it. They'd say, Sheriff, we can't do this. This is an op-ed. When's the last time you saw an op-ed? There's a difference between an opinion piece and an op-ed. When's the last time you saw an op-ed written under an anonymous label? It's unprecedented. So because they have no credibility, I don't want to hear from them. They're going to have to prove it, and they won't. But that's okay. Then I could tell them, I don't believe it. I think you made it up, and they're never going to be able to defend themselves against that because, like I said, they have no credibility. Okay? First of all, if that thing was written by some senior White House official, I don't think it was, I'd be very afraid of submitting it to some place like the New York Times. Remember Lanny Davis? His name got out, right? This guy would have to risk that his name would get out, a senior White House official. I don't see somebody risking that over something like this. So, okay, it's the New York Times. That's all I need. When I heard New York Times, I said, it's all I need to know. Forget about it. Let's move on. It's a shiny object. It's a trap. Don't let them take us down this rabbit hole and spend an entire week's news cycle, and we did. Instead of talking about all of the good and all of the successes that we've had in America under President Donald Trump. We lost an entire week's news cycle over this, folks.
Larry, the white flag.
Well, Sheriff and Michael, a few days ago, I offered a semi-serious theory about who I think authored the piece. The whole point was to presumably show that the administration is in a state of chaos, in a state of disarray. All of the wise heads are leaving. That's what the point is. And then one after another senior official in the Trump administration came out and said, I didn't write it. I didn't write it. They had a whole screen on CNN, 25, 30 people all saying, I didn't write it. We support the president's agenda. So if that was the intent, it certainly backfired. This is the most popular president among Republicans I have ever seen. Even after the first Persian Gulf War, President George Herbert Walker Bush had 90% popularity around the country, I presume even higher among Republicans. I've never seen a president with 90% Republican support this long for the time he's been in office, and it's only gone up. So if the point was to show that there is some sort of chaos in the White House, it didn't. If anything, it might have said to some of the people that are worried, we got this. We got this. So I offered a suggestion that maybe the person that wrote it was Trump. And I must say, just yesterday, guess who else said that? Michael Moore. He reads my tweets.
I don't know, Larry. There's a lot of syllables in that op-ed.
This is where those of you that listen to the morning answer know I get the frying pan out. Anybody's a fan of that? All right, let's talk about tariffs. And this question will be for Mike Gallagher first, with a follow-up by Michael Medved. Or Michael's on the panel. Democrats and Republicans alike have criticized President Trump for flirting with a trade war with not only China, our European allies. Canada is also involved with this now. Is this negotiation tactic necessary, and is it a good idea?
I'm going to twist the rule a little bit. I'm going to defer, since I have my white flag, to the tariff question to my colleague and friend, Mr. Medved, because I want to add one thing to what we've talked about regarding the credibility of the New York Times and the question about the deep state, because I think it's important. It's really crucial. You don't have to go back to Lanny Davis to look at the damaged credibility of the New York Times. Just the other day, the New York Times reported that Nikki Haley had ordered $52,000 worth of electronic drapery for her Manhattan residence near the UN. It turned out it was ordered in the Obama administration. And yet, the New York Times ran with that and said, look at this, $52,000. She's posing in front of these curtains. Look what and again, this is what we see happen. They ran a little retraction. They walked it back, because they found out that Nikki Haley didn't have anything to do with any of the decorating or any of the spending in the apartment near the UN. She moved in, did just what she was expected to do, and it was an utter bald-faced lie. Now, I know it's going to come as a shock to you that us talk show hosts don't always entirely agree with each other on everything. And we do these town halls around the country, which, by the way, I think is a great thing. It's great to hear different views. I love that. That's fantastic. Debate strengthens us. Dissent strengthens us, and just because I disagree with some of my friends and colleagues on some aspects of the Trump era doesn't mean I don't continue to respect and admire them and appreciate their contribution to the discourse. I was at an event like this a few weeks ago with Hugh Hewitt, who's not here today, but a good, dear friend and a colleague. And Hugh stood on stage with me when the deep state came up, and he said, nope, there's no such thing as a deep state. It's ridiculous. Put on your tinfoil hat. I mean, Hugh is really very much of the belief that there's no such thing. Well, the audience, a little bit like you, in Detroit started to boo. And I leaned to Hugh playfully and I said, now, Hugh, they're not saying Hugh. And he laughed. He's a good sport. But the fact of the matter is, the anonymous letter in the New York Times proved there's a deep state. The anonymous op-ed was a manifesto to the deep state. It is precisely what we've been saying about the deep state, and more importantly, what President Trump has been saying about the deep state, which is why we love his tweets, which is why we appreciate his tweets, which is why we know that's how he's communicating directly to you and I. He's not being filtered. Please spare me the pontificating about how it's not presidential to tweet and it's beneath him to tweet. It's the one way he has to talk directly to the American people, and he's been warning about the deep state from day one, and he was vindicated by that anonymous editorial in the New York Times.
My problem with the president's tweets about anonymous at the New York Times was that he verified the idea that there was somebody by saying that he wants people to take lie detector tests, by saying that that it's potential treason. Again, the president doesn't have to respond. This is beneath him. It doesn't help. And let me go back to what you talked about the trade war. And look, the president has done I think, a pretty good job of making it clear that he believes in free trade. He would like there to be no tariffs. And he did successfully renegotiate NAFTA with Mexico. I do believe Canada will fall in line. I certainly hope that they do. I don't think it helps anybody if we actually have a trade war. I don't think President Trump really wants one. And this goes to the basic point. Stuff like free trade, stuff like spending a lot more money to get cars, stuff like feeding inflation, which is a real problem, and feeding higher interest rates and all the rest of it. This impacts the way that you and I live. This is real stuff. And we should be involved with that, because the administration's record on the economy is without question outstanding. We now have a pro-business administration. That's a good thing. We have a somewhat simplified tax system, and we have lower taxes, and now we're competitive with the rest of the world in terms of corporate taxes. That's a very good thing. We should go forward, as Speaker Ryan has said, and now make these tax cuts permanent, and do it before this old Congress goes out. Make the tax cuts permanent, and President Trump is in support of that, and we should move on that. But to get involved, honest to God, every moment the president spends, every brain cell he spends worried about lowlifes like Peter Strzok, and I'm not even sure why Bruce Orr is important. This is, honestly, we have real problems in the country. Al-Qaeda hasn't been defeated, and dealing with the deep state is not going to persuade anyone who isn't already a Trump supporter to come over. It is purely defensive. And right now, we have to show what we believe in and the way we want to change the country. And by the way, I have my very quick 3-word slogan that Republicans should use in the next 8 weeks. Enforce the law. And that regarding not just illegal immigration, but enforce the law regarding street people, regarding this blight on this city and on every major city in the country, where now, at a time that the economy is booming, we have literally thousands and thousands of people camping in public parks, setting up their encampments, and abusing the environment. This is an issue where we need some leadership from our local candidates on the local level, on the state level, and the federal level as well.
All right. Thank you, Michael. The next question is about race in America, and it's going to go to Larry Elder first and to Mr. Dennis Prager second, please. On the Morning Answer just this past week, Jennifer and I had a lot of conversations about a very controversial advertising campaign launched by Nike featuring the controversial athlete Colin Kaepernick.
That's St. Colin to you.
We saw viral videos of people burning their Nike sneakers. I thought the compassionate thing would be to give them to a homeless shelter, maybe, instead of burning the shoes. But nonetheless, we have seen race in recent years and before that become a topic of conversation. This comes only after Charlottesville. The president's reaction to Charlottesville was deemed as initially inappropriate. So the question, Larry Elder, is there a problem dealing with race in this country? And I'll ask it directly. I will be the devil's advocate. Has President Trump's election made people who harbor racist tendencies feel more comfortable to verbalize them? And so take that on.
First of all, the fact that Colin Kaepernick has now done a deal with Nike shows you how well the economy is going. He's working now. It's almost as if Obama never got elected and reelected. It almost never happened. Just first black president, just never happened. I mean, this is the Colin Kaepernick thing is offensive to me. It's offensive because this notion that there is institutional racism, systemic racism, structural racism by our criminal justice system against blacks is a lie. There is no evidence at all that supports that. And it's not only just a lie, it imperils both civilians and police officers like Sheriff Clark. It emboldens a-holes who actually believe this is true. We've seen cops get executed in New York. Officers Lewis and Ramos were executed by a guy who was motivated by the Black Lives Matter lie. Officers in Dallas were executed because of somebody who was motivated by the Black Lives Matter lie. It is causing officers to become more and more passive. The mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, says because of the fear of cops being called racist, they have literally balled themselves up in the fetal position, and the bad guys know it, and crime has gone up. So it's not only just a lie, it's hurting the very people that the Black Lives Matter people claim that they care about. And if these so-called leaders really want to do something, how about telling people when you get pulled over by the police, put your hand at 10 o'clock, your right hand at 2 o'clock, say yes, sir, say no, sir, make sure your paperwork is in order. If there's a problem, get a badge number and deal with it while you're still alive. Comply, you won't die. Why don't they just say that? So no, there isn't a problem with race in America. Are there racists in America? 7% of American adults believe that brown milk comes from, chocolate milk comes from brown cows. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. 8% believe Elvis is still alive. If you send him a letter, he'll get it. I don't know what to tell you. There are numbskulls in America, but is racism a problem that can hold back anybody willing to work hard? Absolutely not.
I was with Alan Dershowitz, who is a perfect example of a liberal who is not a leftist. And you will see in the movie that Adam Caroll and I are making that will be out next year, No Safe Spaces, about what is happening on our campuses. I am in Alan Dershowitz's apartment in New York City, and this is what he told me. He said, I want to just tell you, as a Jew, as a liberal, and of course as an American, that I far more fear the left than the right. Okay, every liberal should say that. A liberal who does not fear the left more than the right is a fool. Nice fool. There are a lot of, I don't mean this sarcastically, there are a lot of nice people who are foolish. I wish it were not the case. I wish everyone who is nice was also wise, but it's just not the way it is. Most liberals are weak and foolish, but they're not vile. Many of them are good, but the left is vile. The left has always been a destructive force, and Alan Dershowitz knows this. And he said, let me tell you something. I don't fear Nazis in America. How many of them are there? This is a non-issue. The Nazis were a threat. The current threat is the left. And when you go to campuses, it is worthy of applause. And when you see it in the movie, you will be it's very moving actually, and it's gutsy of him to do that. And of course, all his leftist friends have abandoned him. Man who has devoted his life to the Democratic Party, to liberal causes, fought for the election of Hillary Clinton is abandoned. because he doesn't think that Donald Trump has reincarnated Nazism. Nazism, as Larry just said, it's a non-issue in the United States. Okay, it's just not an issue. It is created by the left. It's a make-believe issue. The real racism is, as I described earlier. You take Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick, he had socks. He wore at a game. You could see the picture on the internet of police as pigs, and goddamn Nike rewards him. I have never used the words goddamn with a corporation, a company, or an institution in my life. Nike is a force for rot in this country. Nike is a giant hate organization. If you buy, and I've never advocated a boycott. I publicly announce I eat Ben and Jerry's ice cream. They're morons. They're leftist morons, Ben and Jerry. But I don't care. You can be a leftist moron if you produce good ice cream. I will eat your ice cream. However, Nike has crossed the line. They have a cop-hating, America-hating nothing is now their rewarded face for their company. You have said to most Americans, F you, and we will say it back to Nike.
When you get a standing ovation, we ask you a follow-up question. No, this one was really for Dennis. Just recently, Dennis, you wrote a piece for Townhall that was, well, all of your pieces, all of your writing is brilliant. But in it, you talked about President Trump and whether or not he was a role model. And you cited a poll that is out from Quinnipiac, and in it, they said that 90-something%, the large majority of Americans want a president to be a role model for children. Only 29% of the population, at least according to this poll, think that President Trump is fulfilling that. 67% say he is not a role model. So the question for you, Dennis, with a follow-up from Sheriff David Clark, is do you think this is true? And do you think that the president is a role model for children? What are your thoughts on that?
I can't tell you how often my parents would say to me when I was growing up, Dennis, I want you to act like John Kennedy. On a daily basis. Dennis, I'm your dad, but I'm not your model. Your rabbi and your rabbis at yeshiva, they're not your models. Nope. Uncle Murray, not your model. The president is your model. And then, he's followed by another model, Lyndon Johnson. And my father again through high school. Dennis, your model is in the White House. When I read...
I think there are plenty of models in the current White House, right? They're just snuck in the back and snuck out the other side. Okay, my point, which you may have missed, is no one looks to the president as a model for their child. No one. It's a joke. It's a bad joke. If you would have said to me, and by the way, I ended my article with pointing out the baby boomers, the most narcissistic generation in American history, grew up under a truly good model. Dwight Eisenhower shows how worthless it is. It's another make-believe left-wing idea that many conservatives have bought. The president should be a role model. No, you should be a role model to every young person. You, and you, and you, and you, and you, and me. You know what my favorite compliment is? My favorite compliment. Of all the compliments I get, my favorite is when a man younger than me
calls up the radio show or meets me at an airport or writes in an email, you're a father figure to me. And my answer for any of you who've ever heard me on the radio is, that's what every man should aspire to be, a role model to a younger man. But I don't expect the president to be that role model. That is naive. I'll end with this. We don't elect role models. We elect presidents. The President of the United States, what he does affects 328 million Americans and 7 billion human beings. That's infinitely more important than his private life.
How about I take my time and just say amen? Let me put a little bow around
White flag here?
Let me put.
Honestly,
Wait. I said, let me put a little bow around that. People ask, is Donald Trump a good role model? My answer is, it depends. What I mean by that is, if you want to know how to be successful in business, he's done an outstanding job of raising his kids. Okay? We can talk about his flaws. That's what we do with public officials, right? But I would say this to anybody who would ask me that question. As is stated in the Bible, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Okay? We're all flawed human beings. It's just that when you become the president of the United States or a public figure, your private life gets played out in public. All right? That's what we do. President Trump doesn't really care. But any parent, well, he doesn't. Right? His personal business is his business. But any parent who would say the president should be a role model for children, that is an abdication of their responsibility to be the role model. You know what my role model was? It was my father. And I realize that young people look outside of that and look outside the home to these people that they aspire to be. I understand that. But still, the bottom line for parents is they got to watch that stuff, because they'll get behind people like rappers, right? They'll get behind, and that's when it starts to get a little dicey. So, the role model stuff, to me, in terms of President Trump, how to be a successful president, he's a role model. And the other 44 before him could have learned a lesson from him, how to be a successful president.
These things. These things have all been studied. You've seen research where you ask kids who your role model is, and just as Dennis said, they name a mom, a dad, a clergyman, somebody who's a teacher, somebody who's a relative, somebody you know. They almost never name a celebrity, let alone a president. And in the waning days of the Bill Clinton administration, they did a poll to find out what people thought about him. And he had terrible marks in trustworthiness, terrible marks in honesty, terrible marks in moral behavior, 65% approval. Somehow, some way, they were able to distinguish this person from his policies, which they more or less approved of. The American people are capable of doing that with respect to this president as well.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Bill Clinton, because one of the messages that conservatives tried to convey, and by the way, the guys, particularly in the House Judiciary Committee, who led the fight on impeachment, when you go back and you actually read the articles of impeachment against Bill Clinton, it is shocking that he got away with it, frankly, because he was guilty of obstruction of justice and he was guilty of perjury. And he was an officer of the court. He was an attorney, had been attorney general. It was shocking. And one of the things that we took forward, and it was one of the reasons we elected George W. Bush, was a very simple idea. Character counts. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that people took President Bush or took President Lincoln as a role model. Though, by the way, in President Lincoln's case, many people did. What it does mean is that we have to be careful, really, really. Do we want to cheer wildly about the idea that character is irrelevant? In that case, if you're cheering the idea that character is ever irrelevant, whether you're a talk show host or a politician or a father or a mother, you are cheering falsehood, because character does matter. And particularly, Dennis, I've got to tell you, in Aseri Yemei Tshuva, in the 10 days of repentance, we're right between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, okay? And we are supposed to look over ourselves, right? And sending the message that it is completely irrelevant what kind of human being, what kind of decency. And by the way, this is not an attack on President Trump. It's an affirmation of a principle that common decency and goodness, which Dennis has been such a profound advocate for his whole career. One of the things that has stayed with me and it's changed my life, and it's something that I learned from my friend Dennis Prager, is the idea that too many Americans only care about their kids getting into Ivy League schools. They don't care about their kids demonstrating goodness. Goodness matters. It matters in children. It matters in parents. It matters in senators. It matters in businessmen. And yes, it matters in a president of the United States.
So let me respond. It's a very, okay. No. I don't want to interrupt your applause. I understand that argument, and I'm serious. I understand it. I've devoted my life to the belief that the most important thing in your children is their character. And I could obviously continue to hold that. And that's why I don't care what college, or if any college your kid goes to, but whether they're decent and honest and good. And oddly enough, I care more about your children's character than I do the character of the president. That's correct. I fully acknowledge that. So I will give you an example. I can give you 50 examples of where character doesn't count. All right? The one I gave in my article is, if your house is on fire, do you prefer firemen of good character or firemen who really know how to put out fires? If you need a surgery, do you check on your surgeon's fidelity to his wife? After all, if he cheats on his wife, he's going to cheat on my esophagus. So I try to live in the real world, and since Michael and I are both religious Jews, he's Orthodox, I'm not Orthodox, but we're both deeply committed to Judaism and to the Torah. So why did God choose a prostitute to save the Israelites going into Canaan? Of all the professions, why didn't he choose a wonderful, fine Canaanite? Why did he choose a prostitute? The Messiah, according to both Judaism and Christianity, will come from Tamar. Tamar posed as a prostitute and slept with Judah. Judah slept with a prostitute. The Jews have their name after the guy who decided to sleep with a prostitute. Somehow I'll take Torah wisdom over New York Times wisdom. And that is where I learned where character matters and where it is secondary.
Can I please, let me just do a minute. I have a theory, and if I can observe, we conflated role model with this character matter, because you didn't ask, is character irrelevant? Michael answered it that way, but that, to me, those are two different, concise, different themes. Role model, character matter. Of course, character matters, but one of the things that I hear all the time from evangelical Christians, and I've spent a lot of time in the Carolinas, I spent a lot of time in Dallas, and one of the things that frustrates the never-Trumpers, and incidentally, can we put to bed the phrase never-Trumpers? Because frankly, the phrase, like it or not, the phrase is Trump evermore, because he is the president. He got elected, and he's probably going to be the president for 8 years. But the people who opposed him, and I call them the Trump-hating conservatives, I have a theory that they feel validated by the brusqueness and the temper and the edgy tweets and the so-called character failings, because I feel like they say to themselves, aha, see, I was right all along. And so they feel validation. The problem is, when I talk to evangelical Christians, and Never Trumpers absolutely cannot figure out the extraordinarily high percentage of approval that the president continues to enjoy among evangelical Christians. And that's because evangelical Christians are smart enough to know that we are seeing one of the most conservative, pro-religious agendas coming out of the White House that we've seen in our lifetime. Fighting for religious liberty. And that's a very important issue to evangelical Christians. A conservative policy that we see every day that we would have never gotten from the Democrat opponent. The mystery about the Never Trumpers is this is the president we have. This is the president who is dutifully and legitimately elected by the American people. So you either get on board, lead, follow, or get out of the way, because this man is our president. We can't forget that.
I didn't think so. Okay, everybody chimed in on that. So let's talk about another issue which is very important to our answer listeners here. On the Morning Answer, we celebrate midterm madness and the upcoming midterm elections on November the 6th. Matt Drudge, the internet guru, said this week it would be a bloodbath for Republicans, maybe losing 60 seats in the House. For the first time this week, there has been some open talk about Democrats gaining control of the U.S. Senate, actually. For the first time, that conversation's happened. So the question is for our two Mikes. We'll start with Michael Medved and then to Mike Gallagher. Predictions, if you will, or advice, if you will, for, what are we now, 50 days away?
Prediction. I'm going to go way out on a limb. I don't think you're going to be electing a Republican U.S. Senator here in California. Because the ballot is between a very liberal Democrat and a leftist Democrat who is way out there, and it's pathetic. Look, 8 weeks is an eternity in politics. We've seen that. I am not at all sure that 8 weeks before his election, in fact, I'm fairly sure that 8 weeks before President Trump was elected, that he would have won if the election were then. If the election were held today, I think the Republicans would probably win the Senate, gaining probably 2 seats, and probably lose the House narrowly. Now, that doesn't mean that that's baked in. Frankly, if the Republicans do something that Mick Mulvaney was talking about, Mick Mulvaney and Ronna McDaniel, the Republican national chair, who's doing a fine job, got together and they talked to a group of donors and campaigners around the country. And they said, look, we have to go out there understanding that all politics is local. Every race is different. And one of the key elements here is that there is a very, very tough road to hoe because the Democrats need 23 seats, right, to win the House. And there are 23 seats that are up that are held by Republicans in districts that Hillary Clinton won. And what that means is that there needs to be a campaign and a focus on the economy, a focus on foreign policy. I think that President Trump has some great achievements in foreign policy, not just with Israel, but especially with Israel. And this is, by the way, in some of the districts that we're talking about, that counts and that matters because there are substantial Jewish communities and evangelical Christian communities who care deeply about Israel. And frankly, it makes a very big difference if in a suburban community, if you win 90% of evangelicals and not just 70%, because we're talking about narrow margins. And if the Republicans don't try to nationalize the election, focus on local issues, like right here, I do believe the issue of homelessness is critical. It's appalling, and it needs some attention. And frankly, some of the Orange County seats like Dana Rohrabacher that are under bitter assault, the former seat that was held by Darrell Issa, Duncan Hunter is now going to have a very tough race. In those seats, address the issues of where people live and how you're going to change it. Don't get sidetracked with Mueller or Deep State or Trump's latest tweets, however much you may love them. The focus has to be on what we can do as Republicans in the second half of Trump's first term, because it will be very, very ugly and very bad for the president and for the country if Republicans lose control of the House.
I always chuckle at how we have such short memories when somebody says, what's the prediction you have for the midterm election? Boy, did November 2016 not teach us anything about predictions and predicting polls? Now the media, they want to influence the outcome of this election. The media wants to plant a seed. Oh, the Senate's up for grabs. The House is up for grabs. That's nonsense. And rather than worry about prognosticating, we've got to be about two things. And I have a theme on my radio show, these two themes leading all the way up to the midterm election. And I'm fighting hard for this. The two themes are the fight. We got to be in the fight. You got to make phone calls. You got to go online. You got to fight for November the 6th. We have to fight for this country, not just talk about it. We have to fight. We have to be warriors, and we have to fight to the bitter end, because Michael's right. It's going to be disastrous if we lose the House. But the other thing that is a theme of mine, and I say it every time I get to see you, and every time a chance I get on the radio, never forget the power of prayer. We've got to pray for this country. We've got to pray. We've got to pray for our leaders. We've got to pray for our leaders. We've got to pray we certainly pray for our adversaries, but we got to pray for November 6th. With the fight comes faith. And faith can move mountains. I know it sounds like a cliche, but it's true. Prayer works. And we've got to pray that we continue the direction of this country that has been started with the election of Donald Trump and the Republicans in control, so that the grown-ups can continue to advance a conservative agenda and a conservative ideology that will benefit our kids, our grandkids, and our great-grandkids for many, many years. Fight and pray. Fight and pray.
I think that coming into the midterms, the American people are going to ask themselves a couple of questions. Am I better off now than I was a year ago? Is the world safer now than it was a year ago? And the answer to those questions, yes and yes. And I have a very simple way of looking at this. I was talking about this the other day on my show. I remember watching a program once where a couple of professional golfers were asked, how can you tell if a guy's a good golfer? And one of them went through a long, beautiful, elaborate, articulate, precise description of what makes a good golfer, where he puts his hands, where he puts his legs, his hip, his eye. It was beautiful, beautiful. The other golfer went, I look to see where the ball lands. The American people like where the ball is landing. I think there's a good chance that we can hold the House coming in November.
Question is for Sheriff David Clark and for Larry Elder in follow-up, and it involves former President Obama and former Vice President Joe Biden. Now, both of them have been back. I hear the hissing. So you're happy that they're back. President Obama was in town last weekend, and he spoke to Democrats trying to gin up some excitement behind Gil Cisneros and 6 other Republicans running for the House. Is it appropriate, first, Sheriff and Larry, that former President Obama is out there campaigning? And part 2 of that is Joe Biden over the weekend said that he wanted to give President Trump a year, that there was this deal made between Obama and Biden that they would give Trump a year, but after Charlottesville, they couldn't hold their criticism of the president. So do you think Biden can beat Trump in 2020? Will he try? And is President Obama doing the right thing by coming out and campaigning against the president?
All right, your first question, do I think Biden can beat President Trump in 2020? Absolutely not. He doesn't have a chance. He doesn't Senate. He would have a hard time winning his party's nomination the way they're swinging so far left and electing all these socialists, that Bernie Sanders has a better chance today of being a Democrat nominee than Joe Biden. On the propriety of President Obama getting out on the campaign trail, past presidents, some have done that before. I don't have too much of a problem with it. Look, Obama's a good weapon for us. You want to talk about energizing and motivating our side? Put Obama's face out there, okay? This guy, I'll tell you what gets me more than him being out here, how this guy has an uncanny ability to be able to look the American people in the eye and lie. Most people, if they're gonna lie, you know, you kind of see them, they're shifting around, they're moving, they're looking off to the side. That guy can stare into the camera, stare right into the eyes of the American people and lie like it's nobody's business. That's pathological. It really is. And for this guy to come out, and this is what I mean by I said he can be our best weapon. For this guy to come out and try to steal Trump's thunder on the economy, try to take credit for this turnout. Obama was a wet blanket on the American economy. Obama said the other day that he spent 8 years rolling the rock up the hill, and now that it's on its downward trajectory, he says Republicans are taking credit for it and they haven't broken a sweat. Yeah, he rolled the rock up a hill. When he got to the top, he dropped it on the head of the American economy and killed it. This guy sat up there with 1.5% GDP saying it's the new normal. This guy sat up there with these unemployment numbers. Remember when he said to you, those manufacturing jobs, they're not coming back. And that's why I said for him to sit up here today and go, oh no, that's my responsibility that the economy turned around. It's just another lie. But he's not even, he knows no shame in looking at the American people and making statements like that. So that's the thing that gets me about him, though. It's just lie. You want your doctor, you can keep your, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your plan, you can keep your plan. All lies. So I don't have a problem with, I'd use Obama. Use it. You want to return to this?
Well, it's been always interesting how ex-Republican presidents deal with their successors versus how Democratic presidents deal with their successors. George Herbert Walker Bush didn't hear a peep. George W. Bush, when he retired, he said, "I'm through with politics." Jimmy Carter has never stopped criticizing Republicans. Bill Clinton never stopped criticizing. I didn't expect Obama and Biden to abide by their so-called one-year truce before I criticized our successors. That's how these guys are, especially given the fact that Donald Trump is undoing the Obama legacy brick by brick. And of course, he's going to say something to defend his legacy. He's got to say something to do that. But what is the Democratic agenda going forward? $15 minimum wage? Free tuition? Medicare for all? Undoing the tax cuts? Continuing to have porous borders? What is their agenda? What are they offering that gives us the impression somehow, some way, if they took over, things are going to be better? They've got nothing except Trump's a racist, and by the way, Trump's a racist.
Okay. Next question is for my friend Mike Gallagher, and it has to do with, obviously, President Trump, who's been mentioned a few times here, has declared already that he'll be running again in 2020. The president has said that he'll be a candidate. Mike Gallagher, and we'll ask Mike Gallagher, and then Sheriff David Clark, you take a crack at this as well. Mike, you said a moment ago that the Never Trump movement, or the term, should be put to bed.
Trump evermore.
Right, Trump nevermore. Somebody who is a prominent conservative, who is still proudly wearing the label of Never Trump, is someone named Bill Kristol, who our audience knows quite well. Bill Kristol says that he will recruit a candidate. He will work for that effort to challenge President Trump in a primary situation in 2020 when the president seeks the nomination and re-election. So I guess a two-part question, Mike Gallagher, and then to Sheriff Clark, as I mentioned a moment ago. Who might that person be who could lead that from the Republican side, the Never Trump candidate, if there is one? Who could Bill Kristol find? Not that you're in the business of helping him. And secondly, would it ultimately be successful, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, I disagree with the premise. I don't even want to go down the premise because President Trump needs to be thoroughly supported in his reelection efforts. But, you know, we do have a problem, and it is the Never Trump Republicans and the Never Trump conservatives. I was just looking on my phone. There's a bulletin that one of the Trump-hating Republicans in the Senate, Jeff Flake, is now on record as saying that this vote, he wants the vote on Kavanaugh to be delayed as a result. And of course he's retiring, so he'll have no accountability. But this is a problem. This is a real problem and the only answer is us to vote these Republicans out of office who are not hearing the United States of America. They're not hearing the people. Honest to goodness, this is my 40th year as a broadcaster. I've never seen a group of people so out of touch and tone deaf with what the American people are not whispering, but shouting to them, screaming, be unified, advance this conservative agenda. I was going to steal your golf analogy, and I'm glad you owned it because it was your line, but Americans like where the ball is landing. America likes what's happening. Americans get what's happening. And when Senator Jeff Flake comes along and says, well, now, believe me, the Kavanaugh thing is going to be a mess. And it's going to be a mess because there are Republicans who refuse. They have a stubborn, it is the most incredibly petulant thing I've seen. It's deeply personal for them. I'm very close friends with one in particular who was a speechwriter and worked in both Bush administrations and the Reagan administration. And he's a very deeply spiritual guy. And he admits to me, his name is Peter Wehner. And Pete Wehner hates President Trump with the heat of 1,000 suns. And these guys who are Republicans and conservatives, every day on Twitter, every column they write, every time they appear on TV, they're going out of their way to castigate him, to vilify him, to criticize him, because they somehow want him stopped. And that's a fantasy, because he's not going to be stopped. The American people aren't going to let him be stopped. Trump is going to continue. He's here. They want to change him. They want to modulate what he does. They want to tell him, the establishment wants to tell him how to be an establishment president. It's not going to happen. But what the left always forgets about impeaching Donald Trump, even perhaps the Never Trumpers, they keep forgetting, well, they're going to get Mike Pence. And they always forget that. There's never a plan B. And there's no plan B in their mind. It's a visceral, personal, irrational thing. And I'm sorry for them. I pray for them too, but it's not too late for them to get their heads right. It's not too late for them to do some soul searching and ask themselves, what's better for the country? A leftist agenda that will thwart everything, that will frustrate everything that's been happening under this administration, or to continue to fight and to continue to advance the ball down the field, continue to support this president and do it unanimously, or get the heck out of your job because you're not listening to your own constituents, and it's shameful. It's shameful.
If Jeff
Wait,
Flake,
I thought it was coming to me. I thought.
Sheriff, again, you don't argue with the sheriff. It's one thing I've learned. I'm not the brightest guy, but you're right, Sheriff. It is. It's going to you.
Didn't have to say that twice, did he?
I fight for what's mine. Bill Kristol. Bill Kristol is an arrogant, pompous ass. Bill Kristol is an elitist who thinks he's smarter than the rest of us. Bill Kristol thinks that you have to pass his vetting system in order to thrive in Washington, D.C., in the White House. And you know what President Trump told him, then candidate Trump? You kiss my ass. And here's the thing that gets me about people like him and George Will. They're all part of this media elite. But here's the thing about Kristol. When I read the article the other day, and he said he's been talking to some people, and he says, I don't really think it would be that difficult to beat President Trump in a primary. And I thought, oh, really? Well, Mr. Kristol, if it's so easy, why are you recruiting somebody else? Why don't you do it? You're smarter than everybody else. You know how to get this done. Why don't you run? No, instead he's out there looking for a sacrificial lamb like he did last time when he tried to recruit David French. I know David French, he's a good man. But if this guy thinks it's so easy, then he should put his name out there. He should hit all 50 states, or in Obama's case, all 57 states, and do it himself. Because I always got a kick out of it. I'm an elected official. I'm a former elected official, right? And I always got a kick when people would come up and tell me, you should do this, you should do that. I go, no, why don't you run and then you do it? Why don't you run? Put your hat in there. Because it's hard to win an election, folks. It is very hard. And I have a lot of empathy for people who sacrifice themselves by standing up to want to serve in these elected positions. Because it's hell. They put you through the meat grinder. Look at Brett Kavanaugh. He's not an elected official, but this is what they do. This is what the process does. It'll leave you destroyed at the end. And all I ever asked when I ran, I prayed over it, not to win, but I used to pray and say, I just want to be left whole at the end. If I lose the election, it's God's will, but I want to be left whole. I don't want to be left in some crumpled heap because they destroyed me with lies and myths and everything else. So if Crystal thinks this is so easy, do it.
Michael, did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to point out, Jeff Flake is leaving the Senate, and it's certainly a good thing for the Republican Party because he would not have been reelected. And Martha McSally, who is going to be replacing him, I think is going to be an outstanding U.S. Senator and is going to be strongly supportive of the conservative agenda. However, get real. One of the things that has been said tonight repeatedly, and I think it's true, is that as patriots, we have to judge what people do, not their style, but what they do. And it is what you do, by the way, that ultimately defines character. Jeff Flake was the crucial vote, as was Bob Corker, as was a lot of the people Mike Gallagher may not like, that put through tax reform. Every single Republican in both houses of Congress voted for that tax reform. Otherwise, because the measures are that narrow, it wouldn't have passed. In terms of confirming Brett Kavanaugh, Jeff Flake's vote is going to be crucial. Crucial. Now, is it possible that Jeff Flake could end up voting no out of pique or out of some kind of misguided something? Yes, and then we would have to depend upon flipping over one of the Democrats and getting somebody else. And I think Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski voted wrong on the Obamacare repeal, as did John McCain, may he rest in peace. But every other Republican in the Senate voted solidly. And the people in the House of Representatives who are fighting for their lives right now, some of them are not perfect people, but those votes are important. And if President Trump is going to have a successful next 2 years, he is going to need every single Republican support. This is not the right time for a purge of the Republican Party based upon personalities. It is a time for people to unite behind a conservative agenda of reform.
And of course, that means united. And you mentioned
Not unite in singing "How Great Thou Art" every Sunday to President Trump.
Uniting in votes, which is the
Correct.
way you sing "How Great Thou Art."
Right, which is
by your
exactly.
votes. And you know who didn't sing "How Great Thou Art"? We said goodbye to a fine and decent man, Senator John McCain. And you know what? He was a great man, and yet his legacy will always be including that infamous thumbs down vote of Obamacare, where he broke the collective hearts of conservatives, of Republicans, of independents, and of Americans, because number one, he betrayed his promise to his constituents that he wanted to repeal and replace Obamacare. And so, Michael, respectfully, you expect Donald Trump to convince the John McCains and the Jeff Flakes of the world to vote in order to stay unified. That has to come from them, not from President Trump. President Trump's making his case. And you know, what do you do when a senator goes off the rails, like we've seen Republicans go, because of their pique, because of their personal contempt and animus for this president?
Can you think of a single crucial issue where every vote counted, like confirmation issues, confirming judges, where Jeff Flake, for instance, has voted wrong, because I can't.
No, but I can give you
Or
his
Bob Corker.
but I just gave you a perfect example of his Arizona colleague who did.
Correct. And by the way, and on that vote, and this is really a problem, it's going to be a problem going forward, and it's something Trump should deal with, and President Trump should deal with in the next 2 years, which is that bill was not a repeal replace bill. It was a repeal bill. And the fact is, we have to replace Obamacare with something that works.
Okay, gentlemen, the last question from me, last question from Jennifer. For my question, we'll start with Mr. Dennis Prager and go all the way down to Sheriff David Clark. Everyone, please keep it to 30 seconds. It's a pretty short question. So the answer can be, if you had 30 seconds on the phone with Donald Trump and he called you, President Trump, hello, Dennis, I love the show. How are you? What's happening? I mean, it's a fantastic show, and I've met a lot of Jews. You're like the best Jew. I mean, you're like the greatest. If you could spend 30 seconds on the phone with him and give him advice that you could be assured he would internalize and act on, what would it be? Dennis and all the way down.
All right, the second part is impossible. I can't be sure he would internalize. I would tell him what I tell every single Republican congressman and senator that I meet, and I meet many of them privately. And I must say that I'm batting zero. I just want you to know I fully acknowledge this. And that is, you must understand you are not running against your opponent. You have to explain in every election you are running against the left, not against liberals, but against the left. You and everyone and every Republican running for office need to educate the American people as to what the left is doing to their children on the male-female issue, what they're doing to the universities on the free speech issue, what they're doing to the United States military. Everything they touch, they ruin. If you would tweet that every single day with another example every day, you would change America.
I would say, President Trump, you've expressed great admiration in the past for a number of other American presidents, including Harry Truman. Harry Truman had a sign on his desk. It became very famous. It says, "The buck stops here." Mr. President, please at least consider putting a Winston Churchill sign on your desk to go along with the Winston Churchill bust. The sign that says, "The dogs bark, but the caravan moves on." There are important things here that you can continue to do for the country. And it only interferes with those positive efforts that you've achieved so much of if you feel like you have to bark back at every snarling cur. You're better than that. America is better than that, and will continue to be.
My phone call would be one of gratitude. I'd say, Mr. President, on behalf of the young Hispanic father who finally has a job and is able to proudly put food on his family's table because of the record low unemployment rates in this country for Hispanics and for Black Americans, thank you. On behalf of law enforcement, who are so grateful for your unwavering support, your thankfulness for the brave men and women of law enforcement who put their lives on the line. I thank him for getting out of bed every day because, frankly, if they threw at me what they throw at him, I'd be in the fetal position, wouldn't be able to leave the bed. And yet he is indefatigable to the people around him. And I've been to the White House a few times, as all of us have. And these young 28-year-olds can't keep up with him. He won't stop fighting for this country. I would thank him for fighting for this country. And oh yes, I would add, with respect to my friend Michael Medved, with deep respect, I'd say, Mr. President, keep barking.
My advice would be similar to the advice that Michael just gave. Stay the course. Do not underestimate the power of the hostile media. Are you aware, Mr. President, that the majority of Democrats believe not that the Russians meddled? The majority of Democrats believe that Russia altered vote tallies. I do not make this up. There's no evidence of that whatsoever, yet the majority of Democrats believe that. And that's because the power of the anti-Trump media. Keep fighting. I've interviewed Dick Cheney, I've interviewed Donald Rumsfeld. Both of them said their biggest regret was when people started chanting, Bush lied, people died. They both told me they thought the American people were too intelligent to believe it. And as a result, we didn't fight back. And now the majority of Democrats also believe that George W. Bush lied us into that war, even though there's zero evidence to support that either. Mr. President, understand the enemy. The enemy is the left-wing media. Keep fighting.
Yeah, I echo the sentiments of the two gentlemen on to my right. I got to be careful with this. I look at this as a trap question for me. Most of you know that I'm one of President Trump's most ardent supporters. And I know that the liberal media is waiting to run a headline, Sheriff criticizes the president, right? President Trump didn't get this far in life needing advice from David Clark. Okay, he's been a successful businessman. He won the presidency defying all odds. He couldn't do it, right? There's this tremendous belief in himself and this tremendous belief in his ability to get stuff done. And I've gotten to know him. And I've never seen, it's uncanny the way he can compartmentalize things. Keep everything in order and go from one to the next. And everyone says he's all over the place. Yeah, he's an asymmetrical president. What's wrong with that? It's working for him. So I guess the only advice that I would have for him is keep kicking ass, man. You're loving it.
Thank you.
But one last thing. I want to thank all of you for coming out today. You could have done a lot of different things on this Sunday afternoon, but you chose to come here and listen to our hot air, right? Now these guys here, now that's no slight to these. You see these guys here, these 1, 2, 3, 4 guys here, these guys are studs in this political environment. And me, I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy. All I want to be is a foot soldier for freedom and liberty in America. I want to be in the trenches fighting because I'm a fighter. Thank you and God bless you.
All right, don't get up yet. Just by a show of hands, guys, just of the stage, will the Republicans keep the House? Who thinks that's true? Ooh, Republicans keep the Senate. What Republicans, raise your hand if you think Republicans will keep the House. Will. Prediction time. All right, and will Republicans keep the Senate? All right. We have such a treat for you tonight because Mike Gallagher is going to come back. But first, we want to thank Front Sight Firearms Training Institute. Thank you guys for sponsoring this event. Total Financial Solutions and The Naked Truth with Kathleen Wells. And Dennis, yes?
Yeah, I want to say a word about the sponsors. And I say this on my radio show, and I say this behind your backs. I see us as fighters, and I see the sponsors as the ones who make the fighters able to fight. So they're not only wonderful products, they're also doing a lot of good. So it's important to support them and to patronize them.
All right.
And not Nike.
We want to let you know that Mike Gallagher has a treat, so don't get up yet. If you are a VIP ticket holder, and a lot of people here at Townhall 2018 are VIP ticket holders, if you have your wristband after Mike Gallagher's closing treat, please proceed to the VIP reception that you're invited to. It takes place next door at Eden Restaurant. Exit left out of the courtyard. If you don't have a VIP reception wristband, please, you're welcome to visit the table at the courtyard. Love to see you there as well, so please come and do that. And now, as he began our program with the national anthem, A warm round of applause for Mike Gallagher, and God bless America.
Please stand and please join me. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Thank you to all of our panelists.
Thank you for being part of Town Hall 2018.